It's happening.
We're doing it live.
We're doing it live. Yes, we're doing it live. It's happening. The ghost of Ron Paul. I can't talk.
I just want to say one last thing before I close out. I think it's hilarious that Jason said, "Yeah, my usual place," and he's got the shades and hat on, getting to some dude's house, and he's using his internet. It's like, fuck this guy. I do my revolutionary shit on the internet. Jason, you're the best today, brother. You really are.
No, I mean it's not someone else's house. It's my house.
I know.
But,
No, I'm just fucking with you. I'm just fucking with you.
No,
I can't be on Urban
good
tonight,
aesthetic.
so I'm just messing with what you do.
It's fine. It's a good aesthetic. I'm down with that. Like the guy that like breaks into your house and goes on edgy right-wing Google Hangouts, and, like then runs off.
Awesome. That's your meme, dude. That's your. We have to come up with a term like home invasion reaction. Can we do that? Can we meme Jason? Home invasion reactionary.
It's a different house every time.
I want to see that. It's like, fuck these people. I'm gonna talk about Ebola.
Right, no, actually, what's funny is I have enough USB extension cords that I could pretty much, if I get the webcam working, like mount it up anywhere in any corner. So I could make it like a security cam.
You're all fucking security camera now. You hacked into somebody's webpage. Like, oh hey, fuck these people. Fuck the Verizon. See what I care. Man. I want to write somebody write shit down. I want home invasion reactionary. I want that down. That's priceless. That's priceless. All right, guys. As always, it's been wonderful. I will catch you cats on the flip side.
All right.
Be good.
Till next time.
All right, night, man.
Yeah, so for anybody who catches this, now that it's broadcasting and everything, we've been on for 7 hours. So don't expect anything exciting.
As always, leaving a good first impression.
Yes.
I'm not well known for
What was the longest Jackal Hour?
The longest?
How long were we on here for the longest one? Wasn't it like 13 hours or something like that? 14?
I've stayed conscious and interactive on a Jackal Hour for 14 hours before. However, other Jackal Hours have been longer, and I've passed out. So the one that got recorded before had already been going on for 12 hours before it got recorded, and it was recorded with people talking for 4 hours. So it can go pretty long. It's definitely marathon style ridiculous.
Yeah, and I know Jason and I were both pretty affected by the end of the night. It was like we spent like an hour going on about like Egyptian mythology, like half awake, and then it just kind of and then we just got off, and it was just your cam just sitting there for 4 more hours.
Oh well, let's not rehash the worst of the previously recorded Jackal Hour, the 4 hours of nothing. But I mean, I don't know, it's minimalist, and that's like, it's in vogue to be minimalist, so that was the minimalist part of the Jackal Hour, was the Jackal 4 hours.
The minimalist of the Jackal Hour.
Right, I mean, you could submit it as a shitty, like, art project in college.
He's touching his junk, guys. It's art.
You'd probably get an A.
I mean, people like you probably are pretty good at coming up with bullshit philosophical, pseudo-philosophical justifications for shit, so you definitely get an A.
Right, I mean, you only need a couple of lines of intro to, like, take it into whatever the hell you want to talk about. Like, if you're talking about the symbolism of the still image or whatever, like, it takes about 2 lines before you can just start railing off about whatever the hell historical thing you want.
It's really actually very easy to do that. That's one of my favorite things in university to do, is just like look at whatever thesis or thing they're producing, and then to go onto like JSTOR or EBSCO host and really delve deep into research topics that are only tangentially related. find really great quotes, build a whole bunch of great paragraphs relating to this thesis that primarily is meant to disprove whatever the teacher wanted us to explain. And it's like I always love doing that because you can always get an A if you know how to do it.
Oh, and just subvert it with its own game. It's like the whole like it doesn't matter what your answer is. It matters if you could reason your way to it. Basically, if you could bloviate your way to it.
But I don't even bloviate. Like I know a lot of people who do, and I could if I wanted to. But I'm like really intellectually honest the way I write it. Like I'm like, oh, I want this to be good. I want other people to read it. And then always the teacher's like the commentary is always like good grammar, good structuring. Like this all made sense, but I think you missed the point of what I was trying to get across. Like every single time.
Right. So you're probably a lot actually a better writer than the postmodern essay generator. If y'all have seen that, the postmodern essay generator.
Yes.
I forgot. It's a really simple URL, but yeah, y'all probably seen it because it's been around for like 10 years now or more. Yeah, you just go to the refresh to the page, and it'll give you this fresh, sort of nonsense essay peppered with lots of quotes from Baudrillard and Derrida and Heidegger and shit like that.
Yeah, I can't even read Foucault or Derrida without going, what am I doing with my time? I'd rather be reading Tom Clancy right now.
That's a better
Well,
use of your time.
Foucault, it probably is. Foucault, I read some Derrida, and Derrida is actually saying something. I found it more, maybe it's because I'm more of a talker than a writer myself, but I find it more, obviously, but I find it more fruitful to listen to these guys. Like if you listen to Foucault, his debate with Chomsky about sort of power and authority and culture. It was an interesting debate because Chomsky's over here basically comes out and says, if you press me on my fundamental ideas of human nature that are the grounding of my anarchist syndicalism, I'll probably be in trouble. And already, basically Foucault, I mean, he's in French, he's talking in French, obviously knowing enough French to understand him. He may have been, I don't know, but if you listen to what he's saying, and not only with the English but with the knowing French, he's making a really good point to Chomsky that, in other words, his writing might be bullshit, I don't know, but what he's saying to Chomsky is basically you're making use of these concepts that are part and parcel of the system that you're trying to overthrow. How can you claim to want to undermine a system of authoritarian capitalism or whatever you think this is? How do you propose to undermine it when, in order to make your case for why it's bad or abusive or unhealthy for humanity or whatever, you have to make use of concepts that it uses to justify itself. So you've never escaped the epistemic frame of the thing that you think you hate. So what do you do? He's trying to, maybe that's a bit of a bullshit question because you can still oppose parts of something without disagreeing with all of its premises, but nonetheless, he's pushing Chomsky on a point that I'm not sure he was, as far as I remember, he didn't respond to it as well as someone could have tried to if they're taking his position.
Yeah, Chomsky's not so good when somebody argues against him. Something I will admit is that I did a lot of research on postmodernism. I had a couple postmodernists on Facebook that were really engaging me quite a bit, like 3 or 4 months ago. And I'm one of those guys that's more likely to ask someone, like, hey, what books are you reading? What arguments are you coming from? Like, who are you basing what you're saying off of? And more often than not, people will be really taken aback by this. I'm like, all right, well, here's your links. And so I have a postmodernist collection I was reading through, and a lot of it has a lot of good traits. The trouble is it relies heavily on deconstruction and not generation. So there's a lot of breaking down of things. When you break down stuff, you can have a lot of interesting ideas. You can come up with a lot of interesting thoughts and relate to them, but you don't have a good place where you're standing to come up with better or new ideas. So that's always an issue I had. But there's always really cool reflection of this. I mean, the Israeli army took postmodern architects, particularly in references to entries and exits and how we frame doors and windows and how these function society, and they applied it to urban warfare. And what they were doing basically is that the Israeli army in Palestinian stuff or in other Arab countries where they're engaging in combat, what they'll do is I don't want to say mine, but they literally blow up walls and they tunnel through cities. They don't enter through normal hallways or normal extents. They just start going through walls and making entrances and exits all their own to engage like the psychological fear in the people who live in them, as well as being able to be unpredictable to terrorist cells and not being caught in a lot of the issues of, let's say you're outside with your platoon and there's all these corners for snipers or IEDs and things. They just skip that whole problem. They just start tunneling through the city. It was an interesting application of these things, but it's also sort of evil because you're like throwing all the ideas of order to like the wind, and you're just being like, no, we're agents of chaos and we can go where we please. So it's like there's interesting ideas you can get from the postmodernists. You just have to recognize that sometimes where they're coming from isn't the best place, and it's like there's interesting writings. I've gotten a lot from like the we call it Society of the Simulacrum, or whatever it is, the Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord. Like that's got some interesting stuff. It's just the
Guy Debord.
foundation.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's just the foundations of it are so weird. Like what he's arguing for always ends up like making it mildly queasy, but it's an interesting way of framing like the modern society.
No, definitely. I mean, and honestly, I would say the same thing about, from at least what I've read and what I've listened to about Derrida, because what he's saying is, for one thing, if you read like, well, there's Structure, Sign, and Play, the big like essay that he came out with in 1967, and then Of Grammatology is the other big one I'm thinking of here. He's talking about the nature of language and how basically in other words he's creating a theory of a sort of semiotic theory about, from what I remember, the dependency of all the reference of language on a principle called différence, which is basically he's making a kind of pun in French, or a double meaning, because it means both difference and deferral. It's like all meanings of words defer the responsibility of definition onto another word. It's like a kid asking, "So why is the sky blue?" And then you tell them blah blah blah, and they say why. And so and this continual cycle of why from such a simple question. It's kind of like that if we really try to explore the importance of language. We end up having to say, well, okay, what's a tree? Oh, well, a tree is that big wooden thing over there with a bunch of leaves and fruit on it. And you say, okay, well, what's fruit? What are leaves? What's wood? And then you have the song, well, leaves are the green things. What's green? Well, green's a color, and it's not like blue or yellow. What's blue or yellow? And you continually, so you always have to, as far as I understand, I mean, I could be totally misunderstanding the centrality of this in some of his arguments, but basically, this dependence of all things on each other means has a lot of implications for the construction of meaning. And basically, now, of course, then again, you look at what Derrida's trying to do with this idea. He's trying to break down, as far as I know, there's a quote from him about like wanting to break down Western epistemic assumptions or whatever. That's an example of exactly what Soph was saying. It's like maybe not the best motivations, but something useful and interesting for its own reasons. And Marcuse is also just because Marcuse is not just bullshit. He's evil. Marcuse is fucking evil. Marcuse talks about tolerance. There's an essay of his on tolerance where he says that basically there should be no tolerance at all for right-wing ideas, and that the whole idea of tolerance that exists in liberal societies should be used insofar as it can be used against the right, or used to promote left-wing views. But once the left have actual power, there's literally no reason ethically for him to show any such tolerance to the right once it's been conquered. So it's an example of the asymmetricality that people talk about. Yeah, gray flag there, Jason.
Well, it's interesting that you were discussing the deconstruction of something like a tree and the concepts that do a meaning. And I'm more likely to agree with Jordan Peterson on a topic where he says, I'm not a materialist because I don't think that way anymore. I don't think the world is made of matter. I think it's made of what matters. It's such a great way of framing it, because the way you frame a lot of things is the meaning of something, not necessarily the fact-based analysis of something. So someone, when they're discussing with someone else about, well, what do you think about this certain object, they're going to try to engage on almost a Socratic questioning when it comes to the empirical value of something. Like, well, what is that? And the other person will try to describe it in empirical terms. Like, well, it has wood, it has these things, and suddenly they come to a point where they're we call it reductionism, like writ large and all these different concepts, and trying to reduce everything to its like individual parts rather than its unified whole. And that's more of a critique of using empiricism as a system of values than really it is as a concept of values. And so like you can frame a tree and its meaning quite easily. I mean, you have to, otherwise you don't understand the world that well. And it's really interesting watching like the postmodernists do that because they're trying to deal with that problem, and that a system that can incorporate both facts and values from the Greeks that evolved into a lot of our rational systems, we've distanced ourselves from that. And now we don't understand as like a peoples that there's a difference between them, and that's why we have a lot of stuff like Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Right, right, and you've pointed out yourself, Soap, a lot about the relationship between myth and empiricism. And if you look at the history of Greek science, all of the major, the earliest figures in Greek sort of natural philosophy or early science are mystics. Pythagoras, Plato, and there's basically Greek science, and really all of Western science, in a sense, grows out of theological ideas. I mean, it literally does. Actually, Rene Descartes said, who basically laid a huge part of the epistemic foundation for modern thinking, so to speak, because what he did was he started responding to this nominalist idea of God that I've talked so much about in previous Jackal Hours. He draws a different conclusion from that. From the one that Luther draws or the one that humanists would draw, because he doesn't think that human beings, in other words, he doesn't think that human beings are necessarily primary. He thinks that nature is primary, and he doesn't think that God's primary because he equates God to a great how instead of a great what or a great who. It's a great how, and the very mechanisms of causality that exist are God. So if we continually torture nature, basically, by sort of forcing it to give up these integers and such that we can make use of, then we are able to get a little more knowledge of God, and we can eventually become God, because all God is the summation of all of what works, the knowledge of all that works. So if we know how to do everything, we can do everything ourselves, then we're God. So it's an interesting view of sort of human self-deification, if you like. But it's a theological idea at the point, and that's why Descartes says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And yet here we are in the secular epistemic frame today that has been shaped in large part by this very idea of modern science, based on Cartesian sort of principles. And his formulation of these methods was crucial to that. So even in a modern context, or an early modern context, science is being driven by theological ideas. The separation of the two is a really strange thing, and that's what I would argue is ultimately a result of, if not the Mosaic distinction, a distinction closely related to it that makes the division of religious and secular. And I talk about this for the construction of the secular. But yeah, I just think that should be kept in mind when we're talking about science.
This kind of goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about technology. It occurred to me to wonder if there's such a thing as non-secular physical technology, or if that just isn't a path that anyone's decided to pursue yet. Like,
Well,
obviously there is some, like, for example, I forget exactly who posted it, one of the ironic meme pages on Facebook, or just one of the weird right-wing ones, posted this guy who invented a fucking light switch that Jews can use on the Sabbath, so you don't have to go and bother the Shabbos goy to turn off your lights. So it was some light switch that by some electrical trick technically isn't doing any work. And so they're figuring out how to cheat God. They're like, oh, well, we won't actually do any work. We have a light switch that our technology subverts. So I guess that's technically secular or non-secular physical technology, but that's not exactly what I'm thinking. I'm thinking more of Like, we have the power of communication and the internet, and churches exist. They should be making their own like private networks and doing their own thing, like in a very like more encompassing way.
They do. Some do. And some make better use of the technology than others.
Well, if you only use it to like post, quotes on Facebook, you're doing it wrong.
Right. Like I said, some use it better than others.
Well,
But to use
The Amish are the perfect example of that because they take technology and use it for their own means and frame it properly. And so, yeah, they're basically just diesel punk farmers. Like, they spend a lot of time functioning. I mean, not functioning, but thinking about the function of technology and how it should be used properly. But I think they're trying to understand technology as if it could be non-secular is sort of weird because of the amount of techne and technology existed before the consideration that there could be secular technology existed. Like, people have always been sort of industrious, and they always develop new things, and they were developing new things even when they're not religious. We just are in an age where we can separate that somehow in categories. We're like, oh, well, technology technically could exist without God is our thoughts, and it's sort of weird. We just frame things in a totally different manner.
All right,
And-
here's a strange chicken and egg question.
yeah.
All right, what if the restrictions placed on research into psychedelics were all lifted, and there was a lot of research, and they came out with the answer like, at this specific dosage under these conditions, everyone sort of has the same religious experience, and we've tested enough that we're certain that they're tapping into a non-corporeal thing that exists because we can test that it exists.
Okay.
The question is then, are they finding it because it's actually there, or are there like blank slate conditions actually not quite blank slate enough? So they think that they're totally empirical, but they're tinged with this kind of zealous empiricalism.
They already did that. It's called the mushrooms, the psilocybin cubensis experiments.
Yeah, they did.
That was a big thing because there's a few chemicals like lysergic acid dimethylide and psilocybin that have been allowed in very specific conditions. Even though like I think they're both type 1. I think psilocybin will be type 2, but there are like lots of federal restrictions against usage of them, but certain medical and research groups can use them in limited conditions. And they did a huge experiment with mushrooms in religious context and the effect it had on people. The issue I think that we're coming to when it comes to measurable quantities of religious experiences comes down to neuroscience, and we don't understand the causation of a lot of functions in the brain. There's a lot of great science. I think that neuroscience is a great thing to study and develop on. It has a lot of truth ringing in it. We just don't have understandings of where certain concepts come from, and so it's completely easy to frame the brain as a telescope that you can actually change settings for focus and unfocus of certain perceptual phenomena. So there's a lot of philosophical quandaries when you're coming to like trying to make judgments on neuroscience and these things that I think are quite possible. The issue is trying to say we can use empiricism to describe transcendental concepts, and we can use empiricism to describe value systems for either. Because empiricism deals primarily with objects and facts, and those are both useful things to measure.
It comes back, though. It comes back because what if the result happens to be that there is some kind of a common theme among the variety of experiences? So the reason I mention this is DMT has like a very typical kind of predictable experience, right? So because many different people in a lot of different circumstances have done DMT, but sort of reported a similar kind of like place. Like it's not it's not just a construct. Like they all saw sort of like a place. So is there any meaning to that? Does that place actually exist, or what is that? Because empirically you could say, well, when people take DMT, they see this place, they go to this place in their mind.
Yeah, and so it's a shared experience. It is a common experience, but maybe this is a weird way to go and it's not fully thought out, but how do we know anything is real if we don't? If we have a common experience, doesn't that mean it's empirical, right?
Yes and no. So here's the answer, though. You just take what they use with gender when they fuck up gender
Right.
and say it's a spectrum. No, I don't think it's a spectrum, but there is a spectrum of experiences because even though you may be totally empirical in your mind,
Right.
you're always going to be tainted with some kind of like fuck up that you didn't
course.
realize was there. But that fuck up might be minor, or it might be like, no, you're actually in a different fucking place right now. Like,
Well,
it'll come back to you by yourself, but not
That's
now.
what I'm trying to say. Nobody sees reality as it is. I mean, unless you're looking at that beer bottle you're touching as a series of probability functions. It's an illusion. So, what I'm getting at here is this question gets at the root of what the hell do we define as real anyway? So is it real? Why not? Or why?
Well, see, it's all real, but only
Yeah.
some of it is useful.
Well, here's the thing. We forget how central that question is to the Cartesian science, basically. Because what Descartes says, so I've just been reading about him in Gillespie's books. There's a lot there, and he's talking about how Descartes, when he says cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. He's not just trying to be clever or something. He's literally saying my first principle for knowing that anything exists is. I mean, he's exaggerating his premises a bit because we're not sure how much he went through this thought process, but the thought process or the train of thought he describes in one of his discourses on this is, he says, basically, if I question enough and realize that I don't have any guarantee that even my own senses are actually accurate, then I come like God could be a total trickster. I mean, he explores all these possibilities in depth, and he gets to the point where basically I have no guarantee that anything exists. I don't even have any guarantee that I exist. Except, wait a minute, what is the one thing that I know that the self can do? It can negate. It can say, no, wait a minute, I exist. It's a negation of a negation. The fact that you were able to think and make the negation of anything, anything being real or whatever, means that something is real. The fact that negation can happen, the negation of a negation is an affirmation. So you have this sense of building the epistemic frame back up from the point of view of cogito ergo sum. Like, my thoughts are the first thing that I know are real, and let's move forward from there. And by constructing this science, he's basically saying that this is supposed to be better than our own senses, as far as I can tell. And again, he's talking about taking on the quality of knowledge of God. It's interesting how he came out of these Hermetic and Rosicrucian circles, and later became just more and more focused on the singular idea. Well, I don't know, it's singular. I mean, the sort of cluster of ideas that would form the foundation of his science.
Right,
and his idea was his idea was revolutionary because it was literally saying we have a set of principles, a set of empirical principles that we can use to ask questions in any science, in any field of natural philosophy.
And it was terribly useful. However, here's the problem with it. Cogito ergo sum only works if there is a consistency, a even possible consistency to mathematics. What we've discovered is while math is quite consistent, it's not fully consistent. There are things that don't make any sense, and so even logic itself is not a good way of knowing the truth, at least not even in theory. Not to mention we've also come across Schrodinger's cat, which essentially says we can't actually, that observation itself is a fairly futile way of knowing everything.
Well,
so the whole point of this is
Schrodinger's cat is a parody of quantum physics. It's used often in modernity as like an argument for quantum physics, but Schrodinger himself was very disillusioned with quantum physics after his work on it, and he was like, nah, this isn't a very good thing. So he developed the Schrodinger's cat theory, not the theory, but the metaphor of it to show how ridiculous it is of the concept.
I quite honestly like to think of it
alive and dead at the same time. Like, that's his point. He's like, it can't be.
Right.
You know for a fact that something can be both these things.
Fine, forget
Well, if you
forget
just call it
Schrodinger's.
the double slit, call it the double slit experiment.
Right,
because
call it the
that's what
double
it
slit.
exactly
The
is.
fact of the matter is, quantum physics suggests that that the entire empirical, logical, consistent way of viewing reality is imperfect. So when we say that, oh, this is real, we don't have a good philosophical basis for it that we can be certain of. There's no completely certain answer to the question, is this real? So to the idea of, if these guys have a common experience with DMT, how do they know it's real? I mean, how do we know it's real? What's our philosophical basis for saying it is real?
What's our philosophical basis for discounting it?
Equally, I would say as well. So, if they have a common brain pattern, does that mean it's real? If they have common subjective experiences, is that real?
Don't
I don't
people
know
have
why.
a common brain pattern when they're just sober?
Yeah,
Isn't
they
that
do.
also a thing? So why is it not real just because they have a different brain pattern?
But then we get into something weird, like myth is real because it actually affects the human brain physically.
Also, one of the ways of framing sobriety is a serotonin hallucination.
Serotonin hallucination. I haven't. I don't know what that is.
Sobriety is a serotonin hallucination?
Yeah.
Oh! I got you. Yeah, that's actually a really cool concept too. And so that's what I'm saying. I don't know how. I think the answer to your question is, how do we know it's real? Is we have no idea.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, then.
There's the epistemological problem, and epistemology is all about how do we know we know, and
Right.
the issues that solves and whatnot. The thing is, we're talking about facts and empiricism. The reason empiricism is so powerful is it's a limited viewpoint with a highly rigorous structural analysis. That's why it's so useful. We can verify facts and use these for knowledge, but it relies on certain axioms, and one of the axioms is phenomenology, and it's the idea where we accept that there are other entities that can have similar experiences to us, and we can mediate these experiences in a shared reality. That's a basic assumption. That's an axiom that we can't deduce, that we base off empirical observation. So if we're using that observation, you can't empirically prove a lot of things you're asking for because it's not phenomenologically the same. However, there are interesting ideas, particularly ayahuasca, which is the oral absorption of DMT, the South American brew of the MIO inhibitor vines and the DMT heavy vines, and they make a big brew of this, and people actually have basically the same hallucination on it. Like almost everyone has the same hallucination. A lot of hallucinations are actually related to biblical revelation for like the missionaries who took it. So like there's a lot of common themes that reside through it. I would just say that it's related more to the form of action and to meaning. Like, how do you deal with the problems of your unbearable present and your ideal future, and where are you going between these? Like, how do you make your judgments? And that's related a lot in mythology. It's a deep, unempirical way of transmitting high levels of knowledge, and it's just something that a lot of people understand and communicate that way.
Right, and
it's allow us to mediate on that on a level where we're not using our meta conceptual understandings of the world.
Right, but the market leaves an empirical reality. Is that mythology, religion, these rituals do have a real neurological effect. As you said, having our narrative broken can actually damage our brains.
It literally damages.
Right. So basically, it does, like empiricism. It's a stressor. Empiricism tells us about matter, but mythology tells us about what matters. To borrow from the quote that Jackal's been using a lot, which I completely agree with. I mean, and what was the name? Jordan what? What was the name of the man who taking that from?
Jordan Peterson.
Right. Yeah. The thing is, it's it's basically one thing should be subordinate to the other, and in a sense, and it's just reversed now. We've subordinated mythology to we've quote unquote literalized it, and we've made it subject to empiricism, and then we go, oh well, this doesn't make any sense. These miracles couldn't have happened, or this this sort of tale of the origin of humanity couldn't have happened, or the origin of the world, and it's not understood the deeper information that's actually being conveyed by those myths, and so those myths are subordinated to matter, instead of being the framing of how we understand what we gather empirically. And that's, I think, what Sip was saying earlier about having kindergarten morals, or kindergarten values in relation to 12th grade science or something like that. We've got way too much understanding of matter compared to how much we understand of what matters. And people who had the spiritual or just general, spiritual conception of the general outlook on life that the Greeks had, would probably be making use of our technology in ways that might even be hard for us to imagine, ways that are just so much more pro-social and not damaging to the soul. In other words, there have been societies. So this whole idea of technological progress masking social decline, that's a big meme, and or actually at least it was in 2013, 2014 when it was first getting going under that name. I mean, it's very apt in this case.
Oh yeah. So this is very much so related. But you know how Nick Land likes to focus on this whole horrorism thing? Has anyone heard of R. Scott Baker?
Nope.
Oh, okay. Well, he is an incredibly nihilistic fantasy and thriller writer who, honestly, he makes land stuff look not that scary, and land stuff isn't that scary. What I'm saying is, so one of these ideas, though, brings up the absolute horror of a viewpoint of what it would mean to have a completely matter-based. I mean, he takes the empirical and utilitarian worldview to an absolutely horrible place, and he believes it. So it's not like he's criticizing it. And has anyone here pondered the possibility that basically our brains could become entirely subject to manipulations on a level we're not even, like, it's not like you would just, they could force you to rob a bank. They could force you to rob a bank and love robbing a bank, if you get what I mean. That sort of thing.
Well, some would argue that we're already there, and
right, and that we're progressively getting there.
Some people would argue that these nut jobs that go and shoot up places, that not all of them are random. Like, people would argue that some people have been pushed a little bit.
Well, yeah. Here, let me see if I can just quote the. Okay, I'm just gonna post this here and let that speak for itself. I just remembered it because we were speaking about differences between how meaning really literally affects the brain, and what would happen if we get into brain manipulating technology with our current ethical basis.
Well, we've already had television for
how
long? 70, 80 years? We've been thoroughly manipulated.
That's a light version of it.
Yeah,
but Freud and his nephew Edward Bernays in propaganda and things, they were already dealing with that. The electric chew that is television and all that stuff, that's just a representation of a physical manifestation of those ideas writ.
Right.
The chat doesn't show up on YouTube, so let me take what Urban said. Once the human brain falls into our manipulative purview, anything becomes possible. Certain colors, like suffering and fear, will likely be wiped away. Other colors, like carnal pleasure or epiphany, will be smeared across everything. And this is just the easy stuff. Willing might be mixed with hearing, so that every time a dog barks, you have the sensation of willing all creation into existence. Love might be mutated, pressed into experiential directions we cannot fathom, until it becomes something indistinguishable from cruelty. Reason could be married to vision, so that every time you see resounds with truth. The combinatorial possibilities are as infinite as our possibilities for creating something genuinely new. That's actually related to seizures. I forget what type of seizure it is specifically, but there's a type of seizure that people have, and it's usually come about by a certain process that occurs right before it. So a couple examples are
kinesthetic.
I don't think it was anesthetic. It was
no, kinesthetic.
Oh, Yeah, kinesthetics is interesting, but I think it starts with an E. It's a certain type of seizure. Anyways, this guy.
Epileptic?
Yeah, epileptic seizures. So
Yeah.
before this one guy would have epileptic seizures, he'd think his hand was coming to life, like it was something else. It wasn't his hand, like Evil Dead or something. Like he didn't think
Right.
it was his hand. And this feeling, this like possession of his hand, would travel up his arm, move up into his body, and as soon as it touched his head, he'd have a seizure. Like that would be his thing. Another guy believed that there was a mirror copy of himself behind him that he couldn't see, but as soon as he turned around to look at himself and he saw himself, he'd have a seizure. And
That's bizarre.
the reference to this that comes is that Dostoevsky, the Russian writer,
Yeah, I know.
he wasn't a very good writer for a long time before he was thrown into gulags. And within the gulags, they one day they came to him like, all right, well, you're going to go into a firing squad right now. And they tie him up and they pull him in front of the firing squad, and he's standing there, he's about to die, and they shoot. Thing is, they all have blanks. No bullets. But he thinks he's going to die. Like, they fire, there's the sound, he's not moving, and the shock of this was so profound, he started having seizures. And what would happen, his seizures were mediated on him finding truth. And he'd feel like he'd get closer and closer and closer, and right at the moment where he can perceive all of reality and all truth, well, he had a seizure. And it relates to a lot of his writings. That's why his writing is kind of functions in that way. And he writes a lot of really great stuff. And it's just.
I've read part of the Brothers Karamazov, but the reason I bring this up is because I was thinking, what if this sort of brain manipulation technology, perhaps it's just a sci-fi idea, but what if this sort of technology got into the hands of somebody whose only moral paradigm was to maximize pleasure and minimize suffering?
They would be really, really fucked up.
Yeah, wouldn't it? That would be a horror story. That would be far worse than like fucking horrorism.
Isn't that called a drought? That's the idea of plugging a electrical current right into the pleasure center of your brain, and you can just press it whenever you want or keep it on or however.
Except this takes it beyond mere dopamine. This takes it to the level of, it is like that, but this takes it so that any emotion, the deepest, most profound religious or loving experiences are completely artificial. I think it would crush any sense of meaning one could possibly have. And that's what's so disturbing about it.
That's something interesting that Antidim just said to that. But that's just leftism. That's utopians. And that's really cool because the thought I was having, as Urban was describing it, was what about suffering? What about the ultimate distinguishing characteristic of reality? Once that disappears, what can you mediate by?
That's what I'm saying.
It has to go
gets
somewhere.
rid of reality. And the author who came up with this passage here, he called it the semantic, which I believe means meaning, right? Apocalypse, the end of everything. So, I don't know. I always liked the concept, even though the guy's a progressive piece of shit who I have very little respect for outside of his horror writing.
But to be fair, a sane human being would never come up with it.
Exactly. The guy's nuts as fuck. But I don't know. I'm a little bit on the edge of sleep myself, so I'm in a weird mental place. But I don't know. This is horrific to me. This is very horrific.
I think what's very interesting about his writing is the way he talks about manipulating the minds, and I think it's telling of a sociopath who's really thought this through, because I think I think there are certain pathways that that you have to push people. Like, you can't push someone in a random direction. You have to push them towards their baser instincts. You have to push them through their own brain structure and thought processes. And the way he's describing fear being wiped away, like certain parasites can basically wipe away fear, or the way he's describing how pleasure can be wiped across everything. These are things that certain people can experience in certain states. They're actually things that happen to people. He's not describing the impossible, like we all just suddenly adopt the psychology of a freaking sea cucumber or something. Not that someone would write about that, except for maybe some other kin or something. But it's within the realm of possibilities and within the realm of human psychology. And I think that's the real danger. Is whenever progressives are trying to throw something against the wall, it's most dangerous when they hit against something that is a live wire in human psychology.
Oh yeah, and this guy, yeah.
Sorry, if just one more thought.
Go for it.
Yeah, and to the whole like utilitarian maximizing, like they're like a big part of communism, or the way communists handle the world is when they accept that suffering exists. That's when they're the most destructive and cruel.
Because when they become full communists.
Yes, that's how a socialist becomes a communist. Exactly.
It's like when they think they can fix the world, they have this utopian idea. But when they think they can't, it's just about, okay, I have to make everyone suffer enough and distribute enough suffering and enough stuff so that I can make everyone equal and just bring things up just a little bit. So they have the most dystopian views of it.
I would rather destroy the entire world than not have my vision be true. When delusion leaves, only a desire for absolute and total destruction and remains. It's horrific, really. It's sadistic.
It's not a teenage fantasy. When someone says something like, "I want to destroy the entire world," it's like a teenage nihilist. Like, oh, if you had nukes in your mind, you would just annihilate everything and wish everyone dead. But sometimes someone decides to actually destroy the world, and it's not that hard. You just need to take bounded order and say, no, that's not order anymore. That's chaos. And the way they do this is something like Columbine or the Gulags. And in Columbine, it was a couple of students who were like, the world is suffering. And that's actually what Eric. I don't remember what the guy's name is. His first name's Eric.
Eric Harris.
Eric Harris, in his writings, he relates this. He knows the world is suffering, and he's like, no, these other people are weak. He's fueled by feelings of rage and resentment, and he takes it out on them.
He used to have dreams. Yeah, he used to have dreams where there were no people, where he'd walk through, like sort of these abandoned ruins, and he'd find like old TVs in caves and shit like that.
Wait, what's this guy's name?
If you read Dave Cullen's book, Columbine, this is Eric Harris. Dylan Klebold was depressive. He was probably what Comanche Soul would call a full foul. He was a really depressed guy. He was basically suicidal. It was rage pointed inward, whereas Eric Harris was more of just a textbook psychopath, apparently, with rage turned outward. And you combine those two, and you get a dynamic duo that's horribly destructive. And that seems to be what happened. Harris had a real, basically back to all it's open to him. But yeah, that was just something.
Yeah, it's you take the order that existed and you say, well, these people are pathetic. I can't stand them anymore, and so I'm gonna kill them all. And that's what he attempted to do. And that exact thing happened in the gulags. They didn't have the ability to annihilate everyone, but they could annihilate the world for a great multitude of people. And what's more fucked up is that these people were so ideologically brainwashed, they often felt that it was their fault that this happened. Like they would take that onto themselves, like, no, I guess that's my role for doing this. And some people, they just couldn't even understand it. There was a common joke in a lot of the gulags where characters who were like full-blown commies, like academic commies, like the real true like blood of blood communists, they didn't really understand why they were there, and they wouldn't take back any of their beliefs, even if their beliefs were broken right in front of their eyes. You could have like a prisoner tell this like communist professor, he's like, hey, you do realize that food production in these cities is worse now than it was under the Tsar. And he's like, no, that's lies, even though it's like disproven in front of his face. And like it's a common joke in like the gulags and whatnot, they would make fun of these guys because they couldn't see reality hitting them in the face and forcing them into a gulag. And all the prisoners turned guards, and the guards themselves are basically just destroying the world for all these people, like turning it into a pure apocalypse. It's like pure evil, and that's a good definition of pure evil. To look at the world as suffering and to be like, now I can justify horrible things as a result.
See, that's a good definition of evil. I think that gets the point across viscerally. Here we go. Found it. I'm gonna leave an image since we're leaving in about 3 minutes, but this might be a good image. Alright, here you go.
What?
For those of you at home, it is it's like a copper statue, I think, of a crab with a snake in one of its claws cutting it. And that's fantastic because I've been pushing the crab cult very hard, and I've also been pushing the concept of the Ouroboros of the snake as a representation of chaos. So that's a good find, Urban.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it on the Twitter because this won't stay around much longer. But yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, aesthetics over words all day, every day.
Exactly.
I don't even know why we're getting on the topic of evil. I think it was the weird professor dude, but I don't know why I had to talk about the gulag. I don't even remember.
Yeah, it was the weird professor dude. All right, I think that it's about time. I'm pretty sure Jackal has to, but I definitely have to. It is 4 o'clock here, but this has been a very enjoyable one. So thank you guys.
All right, well, Jackal Hour 12 is now coming to a close. It's been going on for 8 hours, so I think I'm going to cut this live broadcast. It's only been going on for 45 minutes or whatever. And be like, all right, well, guess we're done now. So thanks everyone for joining, and I'll see you. Well, anybody who wants to come on Saturday. I don't know if Urban's going to, but anyone else who wants to show up, and who else is there. So
All right,
see you
see you
guys
guys.
in a day or so.
Rock and roll.